Good evening, everyone. It's HogvilleNET YouTube Live. It's Thursday, May 22nd. We are inching closer, ever closer to move-in date, which is this weekend, really, for the next Arkansas Razorbacks roster, the second under John Calipari. So move-in date this weekend. Monday the 26th is Memorial Day holiday, and that's really kind of the deadline for everybody to be there. Now, that's not to say that the staff doesn't have arrangements with one or two or whatever that they arrive at some other agreed upon time, but that's the bulk of the roster, if not all of it. That's really when it's expected to happen. Then the 27th, Tuesday, is the beginning of summer session one. You're going to have the team going through physicals. They'll start soon after that, limited practice. So a lot of important stuff upcoming in the next few days. On top of that, on Wednesday, the 28th, you've got the deadline to withdraw from the NBA draft with college, if you still have college eligibility and intend to return to school. So a lot of stuff just in the forefront here, just all coming up. We've been talking about it, and we're on Carter Knox and to do Thero watch. Even Thero, I've put percentages, I think 95%. I'm somewhere between 85 to 95% in that range, depending upon what little nugget of info I hear hour to hour, talking to my sources that Knox will be back. And then with Thero, I'm about 95% sure he stays in the draft. So that's where I'm at with it. But it's such an Arkansas thing to have to wait to the last minute to find out. So every day that passes and we still don't know for sure. I mean, even the Thero thing, there's just a little window there because of his own comments where the door's almost closed, but not quite on his college career. The Matt Norlander comments that he thinks he's coming back. I did have the staff tell me, and I've talked to you about this intel the last time we were on. Look, this just doesn't look like it's going to happen. It's highly unlikely. We've got a spot, but just even saying, of course, he's got a spot. We would welcome him back with open arms, and one of those things. So even that says maybe there's a chance. So it's such an Arkansas Razorbacks thing though to have to wait to the last minute for anything, right? It's just like, here we are. And again, the last minute technically is the 28th. We still have a few more days. Maybe we hear something going into the weekend or during the weekend, or to give us some finality, some conclusion with one or both before we have to get to the Wednesday. I mean, Thero may be the less likely to make some kind of statement or announcement because he's already declared for the draft and didn't even have any language in his initial farewell that he would leave the door open. It's just the recent talking points. You kind of hope that maybe he'll say something a little more definitive about it. And then with Knox, certainly you're looking for some kind of an announcement for him because he did kind of straddle that line when he made his announcement. Yeah, I'm going to test the waters, but I'm also leaving open the chance to come back. And again, we've gone through the percentages, what I think there. But we've really kind of been focused on as much as anything because with Knox, if he comes back and let's say Thero stays in like we think, there's been no heavy momentum toward Arkansas's going to make any more moves to wrap up this roster. And again, you got your team pretty much moving in this weekend. It doesn't mean you can't add later, and the calculation for what you want to do can change later. It certainly will change if Knox stays in the draft, but we're focusing a lot on the next class. Because a week ago today, you got the first commitment from 2026, a 5-star player value, in my opinion, an in-state J.J. Andrews. ESPN ranks him 22nd, high-level 4-star. He's going to end up being a 5-star again. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to make his way into that McDonald's All-American game in 2026. And so he's already on board. But you looked at the first live eval session. We had so much content on that and the players that Arkansas is prioritizing. When you looked at this past weekend and where Arkansas staff was, brought you all that information, who they were really watching. Some of those names we've been talking about for a while. Some of them might have been new to you, but we've, from a Sunday segment to my Monday segment to the one I did yesterday on Wednesday, just pouring through names and bringing new names. And some of them were names we've heard about before in Arkansas recruiting a few months ago, but kind of got quiet. And maybe you thought, well, what's Arkansas really doing in that realm right now with that player? And so we've shed some light on who they're really prioritizing, some names that we're kind of circling back on. And the one I talked about yesterday and really focused on is a 7'1" center, 285 pounds, class of 2026. He's the number one rated center in the country by 247 Sports, a 4-star. Technically a 4-star, but ranked number one again by 247, the overall 22nd ranked player by 247 Sports. And he lists his name as Diane Arafan, Diane, last name Arafan. That's how he lists it on his social media. If you look at all the recruiting sites, ESPN, 247 Sports, Rivals, they've got it the reverse. They got it the opposite. So they list Arafan first, Diane last. Either way, we'll get to the bottom of that eventually. Talked about the fact that Arkansas is prioritizing him. Chuck Martin, assistant coach, keeping a close eye and tabs on him during this first live eval session over the weekend in Council Bluffs, Iowa. And the staff just raves about this guy. I mean, they love the soft hands, some of the skill stuff around the basket, the size, and the fact he's got a big motor and stays engaged and plays and gets up and down the court. They really like him. And if you go back in time a year ago, back in July, almost a year, we reported that Calipari offered Dean because Dean told me that's who offered him. And then we reported eventually that Calipari was on campus at Iowa United Prep. That's where he plays his high school ball. He plays for 17U Iowa United on the Adidas circuit. But Calipari had been on campus to see him. So to fast forward and Martin out to see him over the weekend, and I know the fact Arkansas is prioritizing him, it's really been, if you look at the priority list, we're going to go over some of that again here later in this segment. It's really been what has been the sort of the MO for Calipari in his high school recruiting since he's been to Arkansas. It's been guards and wings. And that's not to say they haven't recruited players on the front line. They just haven't signed any and brought any in. And they haven't really zeroed in on a ton of those, just a few. Just a few. If you look at the last recruiting cycle, guys like Chris Sinak, Muhammad Silla, they peeled off a Caleb Wilson, a 3-4. Sinak kind of a 4-5. Silla more of a traditional 5. When you just zero it down to pretty much playing a one spot, and that's the 5 spot. But Arafan, some people refer to him as a forward at 7'1", 285. He'd play the center spot at Arkansas, but Arkansas is prioritizing him again. There's a lot of players they're on right now. There are a lot of players that I would say are prioritizing. But at the end of the day, Calipari has said he's going to take no more than 4, and he's already on the board with J.J. Andrews. We just mentioned that, so effectively down to 3 guys. So even though they're prioritizing 10 to 15 guys, there's a pecking order in those higher priority guys. And I'll give some examples of guys that really aren't priorities right now that were listed by a national recruiting analyst earlier today talking about Arkansas recruiting. A couple of names he mentioned that I know for a fact Arkansas is not prioritizing, so I'll clarify a little bit of that, at least not right now. And then the ones that are higher priority, there's a pecking order in there because, again, at the end of the day, you're casting a wide enough net with some of these higher rated guys to where you feel comfortable you're going to get 3 or 4 of them. And that's what Calipari's done in his first 2 recruiting cycles in Arkansas, and off to a great start in the 3rd recruiting cycle with J.J. Andrews. But getting back to Arafan, we talked about him yesterday on the segment. I did a morning segment. And so here's the update. Here's the visit intel. Arafan let me know that he is visiting Arkansas in September. So, a couple of things. He didn't say, I hope to visit Arkansas in September. I'm looking to visit Arkansas in September. The plan is I'll probably visit. No, he says, I'm visiting Arkansas in September. So I have followed up on the other side of things to kind of figure out, well, what does this look like? Because if you remember last year, let's talk about this. September, the fall, Arkansas had 3 different high-level guys planned to come in that mid-September. The only home football game Arkansas had in that month was against Alabama Birmingham. And it was guys like Chris Sinak Jr., Malik Thomas, who's a freshman Hog now, will be moving in this weekend. And Koa Pete, who ended up at Arizona. All of them 5 stars, all of them top 10, 15 rated at the time. Not one of those players made it to campus. You saw Malik Thomas move his out to an SEC game He ended up coming in for the Tennessee game. Darius Acuff, who visited Arkansas all the way back in May of last year, a year ago, committed in July, was on the campus to help sew that up and recruit him, but was back on campus for a visit in October when Arkansas upset fourth-ranked Tennessee. If you remember, Sanak ended up taking his visit to Arkansas when Arkansas hosted LSU, later. So September was interesting last year because you only had one home game, and it was Alabama-Birmingham, and Arkansas looked to line up some high-level guys, and it ended up they just moved those visits out. Koa Pete never made it to campus. We know that. What's interesting is, though, Arkansas did have a five-star visitor in the month of September when they weren't hosting a game. They didn't have any visitors that weekend for Alabama-Birmingham, as it turned out. Later in the month, they hosted Mika Miernan, class of 2026, still thinking about reclassing to 25, which, again, Arkansas is still recruiting him. So we'll see how that shakes out. Will be a top 10 five-star like he is now in 26 and would probably rated similarly if he moves to 25. 6'10" forward center. But he took a late September visit. I think the football team was playing A&M in Dallas that weekend. I think that's the weekend that he made it to campus. And so Arkansas ended up having a September visitor. The reason I go back in time and talk about all of that is because Arkansas, when you look at, like for instance, right now, yesterday began a dead period in recruiting. It runs through the end of May. So there'll be no May visitor this year unless Arkansas already snuck somebody in. We don't know about it. Last year, you got Acuff in, and he committed in July. Well, you got a May commitment from J.J. Andrews, who visited back in December. So kind of, you're seeing where this is trending a little bit, but you got a dead period right now. You can't get anybody in through the end of the month. And you've got your move in and some other deadlines coming up that we just talked about. And then you have small pockets, and you have some pockets of potential visit time in June, in July, but those months are heavily. They're camp months, they're circuit months, they're live eval events where coaches are going to be on the road. You just very rarely see any more visits being scheduled in those tight windows where you could. That's not to say Arkansas can't make that happen or work. It's less likely. So what happens is, and a big chunk of August is a dead period. I think 16 days in that month. So the end of August, and then you get into what'll be the full-blown recruiting period that begins in early September, where it's Katie bar the door. That's really where you're going to start to see visits ramp up. And that's why Arafan telling me he's visiting in September is pretty significant because, again, that was the blueprint last year, except I just explained how that shook out because you only had one September game. Well, fast forward to 2025, you only have one September game. And it's Notre Dame. Believe me. And this is why when I circled back on to learn a little bit more about Arafan in this upcoming visit, Arkansas is going to try to maximize. This is the other part of the information. They're going to try to maximize that weekend for basketball visits. They weren't able to do that last year because the opponent wasn't as ideal. They ended up getting their marquee recruits in later for bigger games, SEC kind of games. But Arkansas, Notre Dame, that's big time. But Arkansas is also trying to maintain flexibility right now in terms of when they bring recruits in during that month. Go back to Mika Miernan. They brought a player in when the football team wasn't hosting a game. So they could do that again at some time in September earlier. Remember, the 27th is when Arkansas is hosting Notre Dame in football. So that's a Saturday. I guess that's a Saturday. So that weekend, a basketball visit might be arriving Friday, leaving Sunday, the 26th to the 28th. But there are other weekends when Arkansas football's on the road where they could also bring players in. Don't forget, Arkansas is also hosting, I think, Alabama A&M on August 30th. And the back end of August is back to a quiet period where you could have visitors in. There's 16 days in the middle of the month that are a dead period, but at the end of August, there's wiggle room in there to maybe bring someone in then. So guys like Arafan, who says he's visiting in September, believe me, there'll be other priority high-level guys that Arkansas is trying to earmark, and I'm told this, so it's not guesswork, for that Notre Dame weekend. Now, they'll also have opportunities to bring players in later when they're hosting SEC games, when they get in the basketball season. Remember, they hosted visitors during basketball season. J.J. Andrews took his official visit to Arkansas at the end of December when they were still in non-conference play, wrapped up non-con play at home against Oakland. That's the game he attended. He later... prior to that, attended the UCA game unofficial. It was not a visit in North Little Rock, but he came to that game. So when you look at where some of these guys Arkansas's on, it's not that it's all going to be squeezed in September, but a good chunk of it, a good number of it could play out that way because you've got that kind of a marquee game, and you can get them on campus potentially that soon, and it makes a lot more sense than trying to get top shelf guys in for Arkansas versus Alabama Birmingham. That's just a different dynamic, and more of a better opportunity to really see what the frenzy could be like on campus for a football weekend. So Arafan is visiting Arkansas in September. I'm assuming that between him and others that they're going to try to get in that soon. They'll figure out how many they're going to bring in for that Notre Dame game. And if they try to spread out and get any more in as a lead up to that in September, even potentially, again, I go back, technically the first home game in Fayetteville is that Alabama A&M game. I don't know who they would bring in for that or why they would do it then, but they could. And certainly, again, they can do it later. So we kind of going through that because really the recruits I've talked to, guys like Tay Kenny telling me 5-star guard who I talked to a few weeks ago and interviewed, put it out on Twitter. You could see it. You go look that up. And he said, I'm going to visit Arkansas soon. So the word was soon. Jordan Smith Jr., top 10 rated 5-star guard out of Virginia. Going to visit Arkansas and Kentucky is his plan after Peach Jam, Nike Peach Jam. Well, that's in July, and that's a bit vague, right? I mean, it could be late July, I guess. He could maybe in one of those pockets in August. Remember, there in that stretch, there's chunks of that are dead period, and so some of that's a little bit. You have to squeeze some stuff in. So after that, could be also in September, I guess. He could be one of those guys. The fact that Tyron Stokes, the number one player that Arkansas is prioritizing, has indicated he wants to visit Arkansas. Stuff we've been reporting on for a while, along with him and Jordan Smith, who I just mentioned. Could he be a guy they bring in for that Notre Dame game? He plays at Notre Dame High School in California. That's a stretch there to make that connection, but so you get the idea though. Arkansas is prioritizing a lot of top shelf guys that are talking visits. When I interviewed Christian Collins, he told me that Cal had just offered him. This was this past weekend in Memphis at the Nike EYBL session, and he told me, yeah, I plan to visit Arkansas probably in the fall. Well, that's the fall, football. Maybe he's a guy they're going to try to get in for that weekend. So Arafan's in the mix for that game weekend, or maybe some other time, but he knows he's visiting Arkansas in September. Now, here's something else, because we just talked about how things got moved around, even just last year in Arkansas's recruiting cycle, but in general, you see it all the time, especially with top-level guys. They schedule visits, and then those dates get postponed or changed. So I can't speak to any of those things happening later with Arafan or anybody else once we start learning more specific dates. But this is the most specific thing we've heard. Like I said, the other recruits talking to me and some of the other national guys, after this or soon or in the fall. This guy gave us a month. It's September, and all you got to do is look on that football calendar, because if you're bringing players in then again, you're really trying to land the arrow in the center target on the best environment possible to do that, where they can really get an idea of not only what the campus is like, the basketball part of it, practices, whatever, all that part of it is obviously going to be important. But you want the fan interaction and that experience to be maximized and be on another level. And so when you're hosting Notre Dame in football, it doesn't really get much better than that, especially given how strong that program's been of late. It's just that kind of brand name in sports and football. And again, when it's a relevant football program like it is right now, it makes it it adds a little bit more to it. All right, so we're nearly 20 minutes in, just kind of giving you a roadmap to what to expect there. And look, Arkansas has been involved, prioritizing several guys. Some of the names we brought to you in recent days, guys like Abdou Toure. If you thought that getting J.J. Andrews, Arkansas to move away from him, they haven't. The Razorbacks top 25 rated composite 5-star guy, playing high school in Connecticut. Speaking of Notre Dame High School in West Haven, Connecticut. He took an unofficial visit to Arkansas last October. So again during football season, I think he came for the LSU game that weekend, the same as Chris Nack. I believe that's correct. That was an unofficial visit at that time. But these are just some of the guys. Jason Crow Jr. Arkansas's prioritizing that five-star guard, an elite scorer that I watched score 37 points over the weekend on Nike YBL. We've talked about all of these guys in recent segments. Taj Ariza, who told me he'll most likely visit Arkansas. Again, non-specific to date, and not even a guarantee that he's going to, but he most likely will. Other five-star, so top 10 rated five-star guys all across the board. One of the 2026 players that I watched and interviewed a few weeks ago at Adidas 3SSB, Caleb Holt, a 6'5" guard out of Grayson High School in Georgia. He told me in that interview that he appreciated Cal prioritizing him. Cal was going out to see him during the live recruiting period when school was still in. He said he hadn't talked to him in a minute and was just waiting to hear back from him. He'd like to visit Arkansas. Well, I saw an interview with him with another outlet earlier today. I think it was the Field of 68 or one of those. And he went through a list of schools and did not mention Arkansas. And I thought that was interesting. Because Arkansas is not only keeping close tabs on him, they are still putting eyes on him enough and relaying it back to me that I know that at some point when Calipari gets back in the mix, that could very much change. For Holt in terms of the schools he's talking about now, and Arkansas is not in there. But I think it's also probably because I mentioned there's a pecking order with some of these guys. And some of the ones that have talked more specifically about visits and somewhat of a timeline are probably a little higher in the pecking order right now. Although Holt is a guy as a combo guard. I mean, I mentioned after watching him that he did a lot of good stuff on the ball, setting guys up, creating shots for others. And the conversations I've had with Arkansas staff about that very thing, they're seeing some of the things I see. But it was interesting today because when they interviewed Holt, he referred to himself as a 6'5" point guard. I remember Darren Peterson in the last recruiting cycle and his dad telling me that he wants to play a lot on the ball and kind of shift to a point guard role. He's the best two out there, and he may be a combo. He may be able to develop into the combo. But you're hearing more and more about these guys in 6'4", 6'5" range that it hasn't necessarily been their natural position, but they're so gifted with their floor IQ and their ability to make good decisions with the basketball and set up others. You can run a lot through them. Especially when you start talking about how basketball more and more is favoring these dribble handoff, high screen, two-man action sets, and you can get an advantage playing off of those. And if you've got a good decision maker and someone that can score and finish as in addition to setting others up, it kind of makes a little bit of sense. But I think Holt, we're going to keep an eye on him. We're not resigning to the fact that just because he didn't mention Arkansas today, that means Arkansas is not still pursuing and going to be in the mix there. A couple of names that a national recruiting analyst talked about for Arkansas today that were mentioned, that came into, I guess, an article, were a couple of names you've all heard. Sam Funchess, a big man out of the Memphis area. He's last year got to watch him play quite a bit on the Nike EYBL and then the EYCL circuit. He's on the Puma Next Pro 16 circuit now. But his name came up again associated with Arkansas. But I can tell you right now, Arkansas is not actively pursuing him right now. They're not heavily recruiting Sam Funchess at this time. Another name familiar with many of you probably in the previous staff did more to evaluate this guy, Aiden Chronister, 6'7" wing out of Rogers. Has played at Sunrise Christian Academy. He's also playing for AEL Flight 17U on the Puma Next Pro 16 circuit. His name was mentioned again. My understanding is he's not in priority mode right now. And so these things can change. These dynamics can change. Recruiting's fluid. How some of this stuff works. You're off somebody and then later on you might circle back, but that's where it stands right now. That's kind of the situation right now with those two. And I went through a lot of the other names that we've been talking about. Jalen Montanati out of Owasso, Oklahoma, 5-star. He's a guy that Arkansas still, I would consider someone they're pursuing to some level. again, there'll be a pecking order for a lot of these guys. And I think some of the higher top 10 rated 5-star guys that are talking about Arkansas visits, like Tyron Stokes and Jordan Smith Jr., until those things change, if they do, pay attention to that. Christian Collins, that latest offer, talking about I'm going to visit Arkansas maybe the fall. Think about that. But Deanna Arafat, Arkansas's been on him for a while. He's the top rated center in the country. Arkansas Calipari has yet to strike with a big man, bringing out of the high school ranks to Arkansas. And that might be the guy. They got in late with Muhammad Silla. Arkansas had been looking at him for a while, but they really didn't. And he came in on an awkward kind of last minute Sunday visit after Arkansas had played a game and was about to hit the road and go play. I think it was Miami in the ACC SEC Challenge. And it ended up where Arkansas's NIL offer wasn't even as good as Georgia Tech's. It was close, and he silently committed, and then Tech raised its up. I think I was told they raised it even a little more than what the kid had asked for to get him to flip, and he did. Arkansas didn't match. They had an opportunity to do it, and he didn't. He wasn't that kind of priority. Arafat is the number one center in the country, again ranked 22nd overall by 247. Arkansas loves the kid, and they're on him, and they're bringing him in September. At least that's the plan now. But again, NIL, Arkansas, I just always preface everything with, they're not going to jump outside of the value ranges they have for guys. They're just not going to do it. And so as these things continue to happen, you say, well, this is just May. We're looking ahead. Well, you have to. I just went through the reasons why. There's not a whole lot of visit opportunity between now until you get into kind of the fall and football season. A few pockets. We'll see if Arkansas strains to bring anybody in. They really didn't do that last year. They had Acuff in May. He committed in July. And then the next visitors you saw were in the fall during football season into basketball season. And so it's never too early to talk about this stuff, because you just picked up a commitment to get this class off to a great start, a 5-star guy that's destined to be one. And you already got guys not only talking visits, but now they're telling me when they're coming in. So kind of keep an eye on everything. We'll come back and talk about it. I think the only thing left right now, pins and needles for this last roster, is does Carter Knox come back? Do you get a miracle and get him and Thero back together? Are you probably looking at having to wait till the 28th to find out one or both pieces of it? That's the typical Arkansas thing. I mean, it's total Arkansas for that to be the way that shit plays out. But you may have to, think about all of it through the holiday weekend and have that somewhere in your mind when you're trying to relax and enjoy yourself. I know I'll be able to enjoy my weekend regardless, but I know how that stuff is, man. You want to know answers to these, and maybe we'll get lucky and we'll get it tonight or tomorrow before we even get fully into the weekend with those two guys. Really that's really about it for now. I've got one more recruiting, another player I want to talk about. I haven't spent any time on this week, and I'll probably do a segment tomorrow and get into that. I've got some information about this player as it relates to Arkansas. It's so it's again the high school part of it. So certainly not anybody rounding out this current roster. All right, thank you for being here on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We're getting out inside of 29 minutes tonight. Please hit subscribe, like, and share if you haven't already. I'm Kevin McPherson. It has been HogvilleNET YouTube Live, the Thursday, May 22nd spasm. Until next time, take care of yourselves. See you soon. Thanks for being here.